This video was brought to you by Embedded System Solution, a company composed of like-minded electrical engineers, computer engineers, and computer scientists, and whose main goal is assisting our engineering customers, non-engineering customers, and technician level customers with their electrical and computer engineering level and technician level needs. Our customers range everywhere from engineering students to university professors, technicians to engineers, junior engineers to senior engineers. Please feel free to visit us at www.embeddedsystemsolution.com. Again, www.embeddedsystemsolution.com, or better yet, email us at support@embeddedsystemsolution.com. And like always, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like. And even though you might have sent the bad guy might have sent the public key, it means nothing. And so the server responds and he's like, hey, I'm sorry, I don't recognize you. You know, and sometimes it doesn't even send a response. But let's suppose it sends a response and it's like, I don't recognize you. You might have sent me your public key and you want to authenticate, but guess what? You failed. So of course, Mr. Bad Guy goes from a happy face to a not so happy face. But he still has two public keys. It must account for something, right? Let's check it out. So try number 2. He's like, hey, I want to authenticate. I have this public key. And remember, this public key did pass. So the server did accept the public key and register it and put it in the SSH folder. So it's a legitimate key for a legitimate user. And so because he sent the key and he's like, hey, I have the public key, do you think the server automatically says, oh, because you have the public key, which is what I used to think. You have the public key, oh, blah, blah. So you're authenticated because you have the public key. Not exactly. So as soon as the server sees the list and it's like, hey, I recognize this public key. This is an authorized user. Does it just send access immediately? No, it does. Here's where the dance starts kicking in. You know, the server and the client. Now, this is an encryption algorithm. This is an openly published algorithm. It's not a secret. You know, just like the hash algorithm, this is not secret either. That's the thing about encryption. Encryption, you publish the algorithms on how to achieve it. And so I used to thought that encryption, you had to hide how to encrypt, but no, it turns out everything's freely published. So anyways, so what the server does, so this encryption algorithm requires 2 inputs and 1 output, right? So what the computer does is, whenever the bad guy sends and says, I want to authenticate, this is my public key, the server says, yeah, that's an authorized user and that's a public key. So once it goes through that phase, like it passes, then it goes to the next step and it says, okay, I'm gonna grab that key, I'm going to use this openly available algorithm and I'm going to generate a random string. Now, this string says Mexico versus USA soccer rules. Because I love it when Mexico and soccer play. It's a thing. So anyways, so the server computer generates a random string. Now this one, the reason why I put this simple string is so we can see it, we can glance at it. It's like, oh, okay, that's the thing. But the string that it generates is random characters, pound sign, cash sign, you know, capital letter, lowercase letter, anything. It just generates a random string. And it inputs this string to this openly published algorithm with the public key. And the algorithm generates an encrypted message, right? And so the server sends this encrypted message to the bad guy that said, this is my public key, and it didn't belong to him, he just happened to grab it. And it sent it to him, and it's basically the server saying, decrypt this message for me, right? So Mr. Bad Guy received this encrypted message, and he was thinking, like, before I learned about algorithm, he was thinking, I have the public key. He's going to believe me that nope. Authentication still hasn't taken place. The server has sent the encrypted message. Now, just like there's an openly published encrypting algorithm, there's an openly published decryption algorithm. And it has, like the encryption algorithm, 2 inputs and 1 output. the input to the decryption algorithm should be the output of the encryption algorithm. So it's the encrypted message. Now, the second input is a private key. But it's not any private key. It's the private key that was generated at the same time that the public key was generated. So that's the missing link. Mr. Bad Guy, although he has the public key, it doesn't no good because he doesn't have the private key. Right? And so if he had the private key, he can decrypt it. But he has a public key, but he doesn't have the associated private key. Only the computer that generated it has the associated private key, unless there's hacking involved, but we're not going to cover that, right? And so, because it doesn't have the private key, it can't decrypt the message. So it does him no good to have the public key, because once he receives it, now you would think, or at least I thought, he has the public key. What happens if he uses the public key to try to decrypt the message? Nope, it's not going to help him. You can't use the public key. The public key has absolutely, well, it does have something to do. There is some correlation between the public and the private key, but the public key provides no information regarding the private key. Absolutely none. Mathematically, none. Well, there is a connection, but you can't prove it. You know, and that is prime factorization for you. And so, even though the bad guy has the public key, like I said, it doesn't no good because he doesn't have the private key. So he still can't decrypt nothing. So he's left twiddling his thumbs. You know, he could have faked it. He faked that as much as he could. But these simple algorithms can tell you you're an imposter because you can't decrypt the message, right? So it does him no good. So everything was in vain, right? So he's stuck in being sad. Mr. Sad. Now, let's talk about when you do have the associated private key. You can't just have a private key. You have to have the private key that was created when the public key was created. You have to have the associated key, like one to the other, right? Not any private key. And so, remember we talked about this node, this person generated their own public and private key at the same time, send them his public key. Well, the same thing. He's like, hey, I want to authenticate with you. You know? Bam. So the server, the SSH server looks at it and says, I recognize this key. This key is on the list. So the same thing happens, right? So it recognizes the key. So it's like, yeah, we're going to take it the step. So it's going to run the encryption algorithm. And remember, this is an openly published algorithm. There's no secret behind it. Again, 2 inputs, 1 output. It grabs its associated public key, the key that is sent. It encrypts a random message. I just used the same string, right? It puts the random string, and then it outputs an encrypted message. And again, it sends the message just like it did to the bad guy, right? To the hacker. But this time, the good guy grabs the message, and the algorithm, again, openly published, a decryption algorithm, 2 inputs, 1 output. Now, the input to the algorithm obviously is the encrypted message that came out of the encryption algorithm. And the other input, it's the private key. That's the secret. And because he has the private key, he can decrypt the message. Now, the bad guy is still there, so obviously you want to be careful with that message. So, on one end, you generated a random string, you encrypted it, you sent it through the network, anybody can intercept it. So, and then you decrypt it, now you have the string, right? Which would be the password in a way, even though it's not the password, it's a random string. And so, but it's truly random, truly a long string, and it's really random. So it's not like a password hash function, but we will be using hash function. Check it out. So just know that it's a really long string. And so what the client computer does is once it sees that it decrypted the message and it had the string that the server computer generated, the random string, and it runs it through also a hash algorithm. You remember hash algorithm? because we cover with password, username, authentication. So if you don't know about hashing algorithm, please look at that video, and we go really in depth in terms of hashing algorithm and pros and cons, because it's kind of long, but it's the heart of it. So it's the previous video to this. And so anyways, it grabs the message, the string, it inputs into the hashing algorithm, and we get a hash value. Right? And remember, if you remember about that video, what I talked about is that the thing about a hashing algorithm is, even though it has one input and one output, and again, look at the video if you want to know more about it. But even if you have the hashing algorithm and you have the output, the hash value, you still can't calculate the input. You know, that's how passwords are stored on a computer. So even though you have that algorithm, you have the output, there's nothing you can do. There's no inverse. So hash algorithms are one-way functions. So again, openly published, it does you no good. So the client is going to send this hash value back to the server, and the server receives this hash value. Now, before it sent it, guess what the server now is going to do? It's going to grab that string that it generated, the random string, and it's going to hash it too with the same algorithm. So just like the server, the client has this algorithm, so does the server. And any online, just go to online and Google, hash algorithm. It's going to show you a list of them, MD5. And so this is not a secret. But the mathematics behind it is just, you can't inverse them, and that's the secret. And so it runs that string that it generated, that random string, it also runs it through the hashing algorithm, and it gets an output. So what the server does is it compares the hash value that it generated with the hash value that the client computer sent. And if they're equal, then it's a match. Then that means that this person not only has the private key, but he has passed the authentication. Now, you might be thinking, but again, you gotta view the previous video. When the client computer sent the hash value over the network, let me see. Remember that? Isn't that dangerous if someone else gets it? Well, no, because again, the function is a one-way function. Theoretically speaking, even if you have the hash value and you have the hash function, it does you no good. It really doesn't do you any good. You still can't solve it. And it's unlike a password, because the passwords, sometimes people, they're short, and that's the key. That's the problem, that people use short password that is input to the hash algorithm. But in terms of a computer, SSH, it's going to generate a big long ass string as input to the hash algorithm, and that's where it's impossible, and it's random, completely random, the string. And so that's why even though it sends it, it's fairly confident that no one is going to be able to decrypt that message. So that's where SSH authentication takes place. That's the true nature of authentication. So hopefully you enjoyed this video and this series in terms of SSH encryption and SSH username and password.